Dear chairperson, persons, and colleagues. A financial crisis is a crisis in any other domain, whether it takes place in our personal life, in a national context, or an international global arena, actually forces us to mobilize our imagination and creative thinking how to overcome this crisis, and even after succeeding to overcome it, become better and stronger. So in this workshop, we will try to analyze how distance teaching providers can mobilize new innovative approaches to the financial crisis, and not only to the financial crisis, because I will also relate to what I entitle an existential crisis of distance education providers, coupled with the financial crisis. When I speak about an existential crisis, I first of all relate to the mission of distance education, which for over 150 years was very clear and is not so clear anymore. You can mention many objectives, but I choose just to emphasize two. Distance education, by its very nature, was different from campus-based universities by changing the philosophy of how a university works. Instead of assembling students from different places onto one campus, reaching out to students wherever they are. But through the new technologies, it is possible to do, any university can right now do it. So it's not just distance education. And there is also a discussion what distance education means, which we had yesterday with some people, and was quite interesting. And also, since the 60s mainly, when higher education systems started to expand in Europe and other places throughout the world, so one of the major missions of distance education was to provide economies of scale, to show that it is cheaper to provide higher education in this modality as compared to campus-based universities. And this is, again, not so clear right now with the digital technologies, and I will elaborate on it a little bit further on. New terms have entered the discourse on distance education, and we see it also in the program of the SCOP program. E-learning, ICT-based education, open education, flexible education. Okay, this term describes quite fairly many distance education operations, but they, by no way, they are exclusive just for distance education. Just to take two of the terms, e-learning. A few years ago, I published an article, and it also appears in my new book on digital technologies in higher education, sweeping expectation and actual effects, on the fact that distance education and e-learning are not the same thing. And I do not have time right now to substantiate this claim, because this is a separate lecture, but just I will tell you that the end conclusion is that most of e-learning applications take place right now in campus-based universities, and most of distance education is provided now not through the digital technologies. And this is based on many, many reports and research works and books and surveys. So e-learning is not a synonym of distance education. If we speak about open and flexible education, so many distance teaching universities are not open at all, not their admission. I would say that even the minority of the single mode distance teaching universities adopted an open admission policy, and I checked it with John, that even this university, which hosts us, has open programs, but by and far, there are entry requirements to the university. And if we take, for example, the community colleges in the US, which are very much open higher education establishment and very much flexible in the sense that you can complete an associate degree at a community college and progress from there in California, for example, to the prestigious UC, University of California system, Berkeley or UCLA, or the other universities of California, which is quite unthinkable, I would say, at this stage in Europe and in other parts of the world. And no one would suggest that the community colleges in the United States can be part of ICDE, because they are not. Now, I point out these problems not just to highlight a semantic confusion, but it seems to me that it's a much more deeper confusion as to the current role of distance education in the contextual higher education arena right now. And we are going to discuss it in our workshop. Another problem that describes the existential crisis of distance education providers, and it's a mistake. It's not in developing countries, but it's in developed countries. It always slips. But when distance education started in some countries, just 4 to 5 to 10% of the relevant age cohort participated in higher education. Currently, in some European countries and also in the United States, it's over 50%. So obviously, the relevant pool out of which distance education providers can pull out students is becoming smaller and smaller, mainly undergraduate, not the lifelong learning students. So this is a second issue. A third one, obviously, there is a much greater competition for students and resources from campus universities. And when I got the list of the participants in my workshop, I entered the internet, which is a wonderful thing right now with the digital technologies, and looked a bit on the background information on each of the participants and their institutions. And I discovered that most of the participants in our workshop are not coming from single-mode distance teaching universities. Some are coming from campus-based universities, like Hong Kong University, which is one of the leading research universities in the world, belongs to Universitas 21, and is ranked as the second research university in Asia, and has established a professional continuing education school, which right now has become, as I understood, even independent for much more students. If it teaches 23,000 students on its campus, it's over 100 students continuing professional education. So there are many more competitors from campus universities offering also distance education. The range of new providers of distance education has become really plural. So we heard about the diversity of higher education systems, and it's also very much more diverse among distance education providers. So it's not just a single, dual, blended and consortium modes, but in between you have many subtypes of distance education. And again, I saw a university in Germany that is basically a network in Bavaria, developing e-learning courses for 20-something Bavarian universities and many other manifestations. And in Brazil, I think corporate universities are utilizing very much distance education method. The cost effectiveness of the distance education in the digital age poses serious dilemmas. And again, I do not have enough time to substantiate this claim, but there are many studies that point out that if you really want to employ the wide range possibilities of the ICT, sometimes it costs more even than face-to-face education, not just compared to the cost effectiveness of distance education. So we have to deal with it, particularly the single mode distance teaching universities that are based on the industrial model provided and led by the British Open University, which was established in 1969, and is based on different ideas of flexibility, even non-flexibility. It's like it's based on the idea of sameness and the same programs for the students. Very little flexibility possible in the industrial mode. This is part of its cost effectiveness, but again, I don't have time to go into it. And research universities, maybe it will change right now with the Vice Chancellor coming in the UK OU from the corporate world, but research universities usually, unfortunately, but usually are more attractive to donors in experimenting new ICT projects. And when Bill Gates had the idea of an IC campus, so he approached at the beginning MIT in United States and Cambridge in UK, not the Open University and not UMUC or any other distance education. So maybe now it's a little bit changing, but many donors, and in the philanthropic world, are approaching more campus-based university when they are willing to donate large amounts of money for experimenting these new technologies. And it goes. You heard today in the keynote address that there is a growing importance of the ranking tables. The two most important ones are the Times Supplement of Higher Education in England, UK, and the Shanghai Jiantong ranking of 500 research universities, but there are also other rankings. And in these rankings, research plays a very important role. And I can say that most of the distance teaching universities are not well renowned for their research ranking, which might affect their budgeting. Growing government cuts in budgeting higher education, which goes without saying, and I will not elaborate on it, and governments asking higher education greater accountability and greater entrepreneurship in generating funds, and even 2 workshops are going to deal with accountability, entrepreneurship. Since we deal with innovative approaches, I took from the Collins English Language Dictionary what an introduction in innovation means. The innovation of a new idea or method is introduced in a way that something is done or made. This is an innovation because changes take place all the time. And innovation is something that you initiate and you want to implement into a system. But I will use also, here, an idea of Christensen that published first in 2000 an article on disruptive technologies, and now it was on disruptive innovations. The ongoing process of building a theory of disruption in the Journal of Product Innovation Management. And unfortunately, many technologies or innovation turn to be disruptive. In my book, I have a whole chapter of a long list of all these .com programs, some of which were initiated by very prestigious research universities like NYU and others in the United States, which collapsed totally and lost a lot of money because they were built on erroneous assumptions. And I would even dare to say is that one of the ideas that we heard today in the plenary session about adopting a policy of a football team to higher education might turn a disruptive innovation in many higher education contexts. So the challenge standing for DE providers is to identify and adopt sustainable rather than disruptive innovative approaches to handle the financial crisis and other current and future challenges. Opa. It really? Okay. In our workshop, I believe that we are going to deal with 5 domains of innovative approaches related to the missions of distance education, to the student constituencies, scope of programs and curricula, technological infrastructure, and collaboration and competition. When we deal with mission, we will get better and better. Okay. When we deal with the mission, as I said before, the mission of widening access to academic or professional studies, mainly for second chance students, was definitely the mission of the distance education universities that were established in the 60s and even before and a few decades after. And they could pull from a large pool of potential students, and since the 70s, I would say even with a relative generous government funding, which is not the case right now. And they were also very much demanded to provide economies of scale. What are the, we will jump, we know exactly what is the second chance parameters. What are the current missions of distance education? Widening access to whom? Competing with many other actors and budget cuts, global or national outreach, which is very important, which changes totally our infrastructure, closer interface with labor markets and the corporate world, focus, it's all questions, because we are going to deal with these questions in our workshops. I'm not providing any answers of points of view, of my points of view, almost none, and focusing on lifelong learning, how to enhance and monitor quality. I would say that when I listened to the keynote and also from discussion yesterday, it came to my mind that maybe an important mission of international global bodies like ICDE and EADTU and maybe even EDEN is very much to mainstream distance education into the overall higher education context, not just combining between different distance education providers, but very much to integrate distance education more fully into higher education. I looked carefully at I was given today, and so I read it again, the UNESCO 2009 decisions after the World Conference in Paris that took place this July. And article number 24 states, international cooperation in higher education should be based on solidarity and mutual respect. Mutual respect is a key word, because I can tell you from my experience of researching higher education systems that in some systems, distance teaching universities gained a respect, but in many others, they have yet not gained the same respect as research universities, which is tremendously important for collaboration from the future status of distance education. And maybe this should be one of the major missions of such an international organization. When I started my research 15 years ago for my book, which was published 10 years ago, which is history already, but on distance and campus universities, tensions and interactions, I chose a sample of 5 single-mode distance teaching universities: the UK Open University, Athabasca University in Canada, Fernuniversität in Germany, UNED in Spain, and also the Israeli Open University in Israel. And I discovered, we talk about the digital divide, I discovered a conceptual divide as to the distance education mentioning in the publications. The wealth of people, of scholars that deal with higher education at large, sometimes do not mention distance education at all. And if they mention, they relate to it as operating on the margins of higher education systems, or outside the realm of higher education. Whereas when you read the literature of people that deal with distance education, they view it as the most innovative emergence of a university since the Middle Ages, as the only way of studying in the future. And there is a huge conceptual gap between people that are also very different personalities, which almost do not merge. And what I try to do in my book is to combine these two worlds that do not combine, and to show how each university in its national context contributes to higher education at large. And I believe that we still have a lot of work to do in this respect. The second point that we are going to deal in our workshop is the student constituencies. Okay, the traditional student constituencies were usually older, 30 plus, mostly employed, part-timers, mainly in national or local jurisdictions, not so much global, pursuing academic degrees, mostly undergraduate degrees. Right now, we have a much more diverse student constituency. And the question is, future student constituencies. Old and young, we have at our Open University in Israel high school students that are brilliant high school students, and these are the only way to pursue academic studies. Some of them finish their bachelor degree together with their high school diploma, which is also a way. Part-time or also full-time students. I talked with some participants here yesterday, and I saw more and more universities, particularly new universities, distance education, which teach at the same time concurrently, part-time and full-time, on-campus and off-campus students, which is becoming more and more a phenomena, which was not the case 40, 30, 20, and even 10 years ago. National and transnational, here I have to say again a remark. This is a little doubt that you were speaking about. It's part of our role as academics. I read very carefully the papers that was prepared for Shanghai SCOP meeting last year on globalization. And I also sent, then it was Anna Perona and to Carl, 10 to 12 points of a little bit critique about the globalization of distance education. And when we speak about transnational students, as a matter of fact, most of the transnational students go to campus-based universities. I was basically also a transnational student. When I moved from Israel to United States to study for my PhD, I was a transnational student. So most of the students that go to Australia and New Zealand, in the United States and Europe, they are transnational students, but they are not distance education students. And it's again a blurred thing that globalization per se is not distance education oriented. Sometimes yes, but even if you have an offshore operation of a campus-based university located somewhere in the Pacific or in other places, it is still a campus-based operation and not a distance education. So it's very interesting what are national and transnational, I'm looking at the watch, national and transnational students pursuing academic degrees, short cycle professional upgrade programs, personal development. It goes to the next point of programs, so I will say it there. Scope of programs and curricula, which is applied, the questions are applied to both past and future. But when I read the memoir of the Lord Perry, the first Vice Chancellor at the UK Open University, he said that at the beginning he was thinking on developing totally innovative, different academic programs at the university. And then he got cold feet because he decided that if he does it, then the graduates of the programs will not be accepted to any other academic institution, and he should not do it. So this applies also now. If we want to make unique or the same as in conventional universities, broad, comprehensive, or in niche areas, more and more distance education providers are focusing on niche areas, which is perfectly okay, but they do not provide a full comprehensive curriculum, academic degrees, professional, and so on. I would even say, I'm almost finishing. I would even say that though at the beginning, most of the distance teaching universities up till now focus on undergraduate studies, in my opinion, graduate studies are even much more suitable for distance education than undergraduate studies, because you have already people that went through academic studies and they have a degree and they can much easier adapt to a online or distance education network. But this is not how sometimes councils of higher education, including the Council of Higher Education in Israel, views this thing, and it's something that should be pushed and considered. Now, as to the technological infrastructure, it was basically print-based, innovative industrial model, which we will learn about from Otto Peters and others, which was really an innovating breakthrough, providing high-quality study materials, which gave a new prestige to distance education. A little bit also radio and audio. I learned when I was in China that you decided to call your university from Central TV and Radio University, Open University of China, not to link yourself to an old technology. And this is also the case with the University of Air in Japan that decided to change its name to an Open University. And now a little bit computer-based. Now, of course, now, of course, the challenges of the digital technologies, and since I have a new book on it, I really can go on, and I will not. But how to adjust the large-scale DTUs, which are based on the industrial mode, to the digital technologies. And I would say, Ima, that it's not by chance that you started from the very start. I talked with Gabriel Ferrato when I met him in Cologne, that you decided to go. You are very exceptional in the European scenery of distance education, to go from the very start, when you started as an online university, which is not the case with UNED and any other single-mode universities that were established in the 70s and in the 80s, which is quite an exception. Also in the United States, most of distance education is mainly carried on through the digital technologies. How to overcome the digital divide, which was related here in other presentations. Are there still cost-effectiveness advantages to the DE delivery, which is a huge, huge challenge, and it's not quite sure. If you take part-time lecturers, which are badly paid, and you use them, so okay, you can provide economies of scale, but this is not the idea. How to utilize the open educational resources, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and I'm sure that it's going to be dealt with, which can minimize the costs of good materials to be used all over the world, and how to overcome language barriers. In some cases, we hear that the open universities want to emphasize the language of their places, like in Portugal, I read, and other places, but unquestionably, the lingua franca of the academic world is English. And we see it also here in the conference. So we should relate to this issue. I will jump, this is my book. And past the last point of related to a policy of the past distance teaching university, standalone university. Ima, you referred to me, I think, a month ago or something like that, and asked me to contribute a chapter to a new book that you are editing on turning universities upside down. Ah, this is the, sorry. I didn't know that I was thinking about transparency. Oh, okay. Okay, so, and I agreed. Sorry, I didn't ask your permission before, but I agreed to contribute a chapter, and my chapter will deal with the transformation of universities from a philosophy and a policy of stand-alone institutions to a policy and philosophy of belonging to a national or global network, which is very difficult and very problematic, but this is the case right now, and it's very much turning the philosophy of university. So are they stand-alone universities, mega or large-scale universities, absorbing large number of students, and so on. So this was a past DTU reputation, but now when you look, collaboration and competition, it's very important to identify the cooperating parties in academia and the corporate world with whom we would like to work with, and also identify competitors. And I think that here, if I lost my last page, flexible crisis. How should we, yes. We are going to deal in our workshop, and this is my last slide, how we can mobilize fruitful collaboration to attract new student clienteles, reduce costs for course development, enhance flexibility, ensure high quality mechanisms, provide niche and richer and better programs, and strengthen the financial base of distance providers. But the literature dealing with collaborative ventures is full of failures and with very little successes. So it's not given that it's very easy to collaborate. And this is something in art that we should develop in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.